Hey campers, good morning. Coach Kinley here, and good discussion question today. It's about the key to training. How do you get fast? How do you become the runner you want to be? And I assume for all of us, that's the fastest runner we can be. Training. The story I've got for you today is called "The Sword You Forge," and it deals in particular with the this thing I see a lot in runners, all runners, not just young runners, but all runners, where they're looking for the magic bullet. If I could just find the magic thing, right? I had a buddy in high school who used to believe that backwards running, if every day after practice he would do 50-meter backward strides, and he really thought this was like the key to his success. And of course, I thought he was crazy. But that's something that it's easy to fall into. There's the secret. I saw the Notre Dame head coach, who's a teammate of mine, a high school teammate of mine, Matt Sparks. I saw him at a Bed Bath and Beyond. Oh, we're looking for sheets. Anyway, I saw him there, and I had just taken on the position of being the head coach. And even though I've got more than 15 marathons under my belt, even though I've run 1,000 5Ks, being in charge of other people, it got me thinking, what's the secret? I got a little insecure. I wanted to know what the secret was. And he smiled, and when I asked him what the secret was, and he said there's no secret. He said everybody knows the same thing. It's just a question of getting your athletes to do it right. So anyway, the story is called "The Sword You Forge," like I said, and based on two of my best buddies. A lot of my stories are based on. Well, they're all based on people I actually know. That's one of the great things about running. Lots of characters. So the question, though, again, is how do you get fast? And I want to talk about it too. So let me take one more drink of coffee. Put it down. My microphone is all squirrely. I'm gonna have to pull it in a little bit every now and then, but that's all right. Here we go. The Sword You Forge. Kleiny's sword reminded me of a narwhal horn I'd once seen in the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. Scrimshaw, I think the term was, for the chiseled artwork on that yellowed ivory. My teammate's carvings were scratched out on a less exotic medium, a butternut branch he'd found on a riverbank. But he worked on it in the same obsessive, patient way I imagine sailors used to scrape away at walrus and whalebone for years on end as they sailed the lonely waters, hugging the earth. However, rather than while in the belly of a whaling ship cruising far out at sea, Kleiny chipped away at his particular piece of folk art in the ass end of a big yellow while rolling down the highway. His obsession began one late summer night in the glow of our campfire while at camp. The more he tweaked his talisman, the more precious it was to him. That year was his senior year. At camp, he'd claimed the number one spot on our team, his substantial natural talent having bloomed the year before. He treated his success the same way he treated his sword's evolution, as something beyond logic, something mysterious and magical and intuitive in the extreme. For Kleiny, running was all about the intricacies, the hundreds of tiny details, any one of which, should he get it wrong, might end up in a poor performance. If Coach said do a half-mile warm-up, Kleiny wondered why not a mile. The difference in his obsessive mind was potentially disastrous. If our workout consisted of 5 half-mile repeats, Kleiny worried that 4 repeats of 1,000 meters might be better, might in fact be the difference between a good race and a bad race the next time out. 12 ounces of Gatorade? 10 seemed like a better number. If he drank 10 and ran well, clearly those 2 ounces he'd not consumed would have been the reason. The only thing he didn't nitpick was mileage. That he didn't like to think about too much. Thanks to his natural talent, he didn't have to. Chambers, on the other hand, was a mileage hog and had been since his first high school race. That season, his senior year as well, he'd turned into a steamroller, improving, unlike Kleine, with nearly every race. This he chalked up to being a greedy mileage beast, a year-round road warrior. That summer, due to consistent training over the previous 3 years, never missing a day, never pushing too hard and risking injury, yet always pushing, he'd achieved his goal of averaging more than 10 miles a day, more than 70 miles a week. And he didn't care how he got it in. 3 miles in the dark of early morning before work, 7 in the blazing summer sun after, 10 all at once around midnight after the heat of the day had faded. For Chambers, running was a profoundly simple endeavor. It was all about adding up the miles. He openly mocked Kleinhelter's sense of mystery and wonder about how one might get better. It was good-natured, friendly teasing. Well, at least at first. This microphone. You'd think running backward might make you faster. Running forward... Oh, there we go. Let me read that again. You think running backward might make you faster running forward? He'd laughed as we watched Kleine do 30-meter strides in reverse, kicking his heels backward, his neck twisted so he could see where he was running. It was a hot August afternoon early in the season. You sure you don't want to just get in an extra 3 with me instead? I read about this in Runner's World, Kleine said after he slowed to a backwards walk. It's supposed to be a magic bullet, guaranteed to cut 10 seconds off your PR. Everything's a magic bullet to you, Chambers said. He shook his head and chuckled. Pickle juice, he said. Remember that? When he drank pickle juice every day to avoid cramps? I nodded. And he hadn't been having cramps before he started drinking it, I said. And he started getting them after, laughed Keene, as he tried out a backward sprint and stopped halfway through. Shit, man, that's just dumb. Anyone? Asked Chambers. 3 more miles? That day, before doing his backward strides, Kleine had run the last mile of our workout barefoot. He claimed it was proven that the reason the Kenyans were so good was that they didn't wear shoes. Something, he argued, to do with the enhanced feel for the ground. To this, Chambers guffawed and said Kenyan dominance had nothing to do with running barefoot and everything to do with running to and from school, sometimes as many as 14 miles roundabout throughout their entire childhoods. They're logging 70-mile weeks in the first grade, he said, a grin on his face at Kleinhelter's nonsense. None of us were interested in joining Chambers to make it an even 10 that day. We preferred sitting on the grass, taking in the strange sight of Kleine running backwards. Chambers wasn't laughing anymore as the tournament came on that year. At the start of September, he'd moved up from 6th man to 4th, and then made a most surprising leap to 2nd man as October approached. In 1 month, he'd turned into a runaway freight train, his momentum building with each success. A model of grit and focus, he was our team captain. And suddenly, thanks to his breakthrough, he was captaining a team that had a real chance to go to state. But to get there, we needed Kleinhelter down where he'd started the season. Unfortunately, he was going the opposite direction. And it wasn't like he didn't care. That wasn't the problem. In fact, he was more obsessed with insignificant minutiae than ever. It was all there on his sword, covered with intricate patterns and imagery, the handle polished and glowing from its creator's nervous burnishings over the preceding 3 months. It told the story of his season. He was carving what looked to be a question mark in the butt of the handle, one of the few spaces left without decoration, as we rode the bus to our last meet of the season before the tournament. What are you reading? Kleine asked Chambers across the open space between the 2 back seats where the seniors sat. He didn't look up from his sword. Once a runner, said Chambers. He glanced over at the other back seat of the bus, where Kleine was sprawled out, his attention on his carving. He rolled his eyes, then licked his thumb and used it to flip a page. Again? Asked Kleine, his eyes down. Why would you read a book more than once? There's good stuff in here, said Chambers. He stared across the back seats, but Kleinhelter couldn't feel it. Lessons. Things you forget if you don't have something to remind you. Kind of like the Bible, said Popeye, as he leaned back over the bus seat. Kind of, said Chambers. He smiled at Popeye, and Popeye smiled back. Well, said Kleiny, his head still down, read me something so I get faster. He blew a curled shaving that looked like a hangnail off onto the black rubber mat on the bus floor. I'll read you something, said Chambers, but it won't make you faster. Well, just read it anyway, said Kleinhelter, eyes still down. Teach us a lesson. Chambers flipped the book to a folded down page. Dark ink stained the margins. The bus grew quiet, but for the scritch of the tip of Kleiny's knife on the soft wood of his sword. Chambers began reading. What was the secret, they wanted to know? In 1,000 different ways, they wanted to know the secret. And not one of them was prepared, truly prepared, to believe that it had not so much to do with chemicals and zippy metal tricks as with that most unprofound and sometimes heart-rending process of removing, molecule by molecule, the very tough rubber that comprised the bottoms of his training shoes. The trial of miles of trials. He closed the book and stared hard at Kleiny. Here endeth the lesson. In response, Kleinhelter continued to work his jackknife, his attention unfailingly on his detailing. Did you hear that? Said Chambers. His voice was tight and quiet, his eyes bright. Were you listening? Hear what? Said Kleiny. The secret. Kleinhelter stopped working away and finally looked at Chambers in the eye. The secret? The secret to running fast? Leo began to laugh. So did I. Chambers shook his head, annoyed. Seriously, read it again, Kleiny begged. Chambers tossed him the book. Read it yourself, he said. You ought to read the whole thing anyway, not just the part you think has the secret. No way, said Kleinhelter. Why would I read a whole book? That would take forever. Just tell me. Chambers looked at me over the bus seat. Can you believe this? He said. Just kick his ass today, I said, grinning. Maybe then he'll read the book. Maybe then he'll think reading a book is the secret. Good idea, said Chambers. And that afternoon, after Chambers did kick Kleinhelter's ass for the first time, after he kicked all our asses and went on to place first in the meet for his first ever win, after Kleinhelter wilted in shock after Chambers left him with a mile to go, after Kleinhelter ran a time over 17 minutes for the first time that season, after all that, he was crushed. I've been taking these vitamins that are supposed to make my finish stronger, he groaned as he sat on a bleached-out bench back at our camp, exactly 10 ounces of Gatorade in one hand. I've been using this roller on my calves every night. I've been doing ice baths. Ice baths suck. Why aren't I getting faster? He had his intricate little carved sword in his other hand. It had become a security blanket of a sort for him. He rubbed away with his thumb at the hilt. Chambers had had enough. He stood from where he'd been stretching and drinking a can of Coke on his towel and walked into the woods next to our camp. He quickly returned with a heavy fallen branch. It had to have been 3 feet long and a good 10 pounds, roughly the same size as a baseball bat, except with a tip of sharp splintered wood rather than a rounded bulb. It was a nice sturdy whooping stick. He made his way over to where Kleiny sat in confusion and misery. Get up with that thing, that puny little knife you've been working on all year. Let's go, me and you. He began swinging his piece of wood about like it was a broadsword, and he was some knight preparing for a battle to the death. Kleinhelter just stared. What? He finally said. You've been messing around with that thing all season, worrying it like you've been worrying about how many meters you're supposed to do for your strides. Let's go, me and you. I'm going to show you my stick I've been working on for the last 4 years. We were all confused, not just Kleiny, but Chambers was in teaching mode. Stand up with that precious little piece of nothing and see how it goes against this sword. He banged his branch on the ground with a heavy thump. This sword I started making back in my freshman year when I was the 3rd slowest guy on the team. He pounded the ground again. This sword I made by putting in mile after mile, building it up until I was able to keep packing on more miles and more miles until I finally had this massive thing. He raised his log above his head, holding it with both hands. This heavy son of a bitch! And with that, he swung and hit Kleinhelter's knife out of his hand. He then took 2 steps and smashed it in a single blow, burying half of it in the ground. Jesus, said Kleinhelter after a shocked moment. What'd you do that for? Chambers threw his log back on the ground next to Kleiny's crushed sword. The trials of Miles, he said. And then he quoted John L. Parker's book to Kleiny, this time entirely from memory. And this time his good friend heard him. What was the secret? They wanted to know. In 1,000 different ways they wanted to know the secret. And not one of them was prepared, truly prepared, to believe that it had not so much to do with chemicals and zippy mental tricks as with that most unprofound and sometimes heart-rending process of removing molecule by molecule the very tough rubber that comprised the bottoms of his training shoes. The trial of Miles, miles of trials. So, Kleinhelter, he's real. He's hilarious. He's still that way. He's amazing though. He ran a 14:25K in college, and he learned the value of running 100-mile weeks to do that. And then as a grown up, he's run Boston with me several times. He does it on one weekend run. It's crazy. But he's not fast. He could be fast. So the discussion question, the key to training, how do you get fast, I'd like to hear from you on that. And I would like to hear about details. Mileage is the obvious key. You just got to run a certain number of miles a week. We might disagree on what that number is, but I would say if you want to be a serious, high school runner, real serious varsity contending, in the big meets, I just can't see running less than 40 miles a week, and you just have to be super talented to be there without that mileage. And then again, I've seen guys that I didn't feel were very talented at all who really could load on the miles, which is a talent in itself, to not be injured, to be able to run that big mileage and get away with it. There's a talent there that we often don't recognize as a talent. Durability as talent, right? So, but let me know those details, and let me also know about crazy things you've heard that people thought were going to make them fast. Somebody thought running on the treadmill was the key, or maybe I don't know, sleeping in an oxygen tent. I think that's not to say that these things can't add some little bit of an edge to you. It's just to say that if that's what you think, if you're like Kleiny in the story, if you think that's the key, then you're just in denial of the pain of what it's really going to take. So anyway, let me know, and have a good day, and talk later.